week on Storyboard, Tony Davidson, global partner, Wieden & Kennedy, speaks to us about how advertising has changed over the years. We speak to Raj Kamble, founder and CCO of Famous Innovations, about his journey from an advertising employee to owning an independent advertising agency. On today's notice board, we have a Tamil commercial for you by Happy Creative Services. Hello and welcome to Storyboard. I'm Surabhi Upadhyay. The 11th edition of Curious Design Yatra 2016, held at Jaipur, saw a huge turnout of professionals from the creative industry, corporates and brand and marketing managers from India's leading companies. On the sidelines of the event, we caught up with Tony Davidson, global partner, Wieden & Kennedy, who spoke to us about how he feels the advertising industry has changed from the 60s and the 80s, the importance of connecting with the consumers, his predictions for WPP and Omnicom, and the amazing culture at Wieden. Let's hear the conversation.
You've been a long time in the business. Would you have got into advertising if the advertising was what you believe in today?
The honest answer to that is probably no.
Okay. So what has changed?
I think probably the heyday of advertising, I probably wasn't quite there for. So in the 50s and 60s, a new thing came along, which was television and sort of, television commercials. And it was kind of like, wow, you make these things in film and somebody pays you to make them and you do a little story and and if you think about, clients didn't really understand it, but they knew they needed it because when they ran it, sales went up.
Right.
And it was kind of like this new thing, and I think people in London in the 60s, Hegarty talks about it, Saatchi talks about it, there's amazing people involved in, Lord Putnam was in it. There's some really great writers, and I mean writers. Salman Rushdie was in advertising.
Absolutely.
I mean, I joined in the 80s when I think advertising was running away with itself a bit.
Right.
And they were, there was a lot of money being made, and I think strategy had started to come in with BMP and planning. So you needed to be you couldn't just be
a writer or a marketer.
It was kind of, you needed to have some science behind it. Right. And the science seems to have got stronger and stronger as more, sort of rational measures for whether something's working or not. Right. And in all honesty, I don't really see that a lot of stuff, considering all this research and stuff, is a lot better now. Right. I find less and less people taking risks and less sort of gut feel. And when I look at movements in society, like, punk or art movements where people rebelled, and then something new comes out, because I think humanity likes to be curious. When everything gets the same, it's sort of, there's not as much disruption as I would like in the business. That said, I think there's a huge role for brand communication still, and design communications, and I think the lines between those are getting more and more blurred.
Less than 2-3 months ago, I spoke to Dave Trott, and he was saying very similar things. He's saying in the 60s and 70s, the creative directors lived. They lived with the people they sold things to.
Yeah.
And he's saying now they're so disconnected. You've got the decision makers sitting in ivory towers, and they have no idea what the consumer says, wants, likes, dislikes, and so on. Do you subscribe to that?
There's a lot. I think Dave was always someone who went with his gut. He was always a man of the people. I heard stories about him when he was at BMP. He'd come back and say, "Oh, I was in East London in a pub the other day, and I heard this band playing." And then they'd use that band for the music for John Smith, or like Courage
No,
Best.
he has the argument that because of this connect with the people, jingles and so on became popular culture.
Yeah.
Or taglines became popular culture, which doesn't happen today.
It's
just
again,
do it. Perhaps you could.
Again, I think it's like that's become homogenized. It's like, you have to have an end line. Why? Why? Like back then, but maybe you need something fresh now. You actually need a purpose in a company. If you were setting a company up now, I think what Michael Johnson was talking about, like, why are you here?
Sure.
Because the public is starting to demand different things of a company. I think open sourcing, where all your products come from, how far they're traveling.
Right.
People want to know that now. There's a swing, it's the high end at the moment, but gradually it will become the masses.
Right.
So, how do you communicate that? do you even need advertising to communicate that? I mean, it's just all being spun around. I think it's a fascinating, exciting time, but I think too many of us are still sort of treading the same wheels of motion, and it's hard because you can't change everything suddenly, especially when you've got a big company. But I do worry. I think you need more independent thinkers who have the ability to pivot and change a lot more than, say, I think our industry was really hurt, I'll say it now, by WPP,
right,
by companies buying everything, acquisitions. In the end, that becomes about margins.
Right.
Like it or not, Martin Sorrell was not a creative person.
Never has been.
He came,
Never
and he's
claims
done
to
a brilliant job for making money for that company, and he claims to be about creativity, but he's not really. That's not his background.
Right, sure.
And I go, I think it's why Dan's fought very, very hard to keep Wieden & Kennedy independent, right, so that it can, if it wants to, and if it's brave enough to step off the gravy train and work out what the future is for a creative company. Because yes, you do need to make money, Martin, to feed mouths to thing, but how do you balance that with doing good and energizing a workforce? Because I don't think many young people want to get into advertising now.
Right. So right now, that's the next question I want to ask you. If you bumped into a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old and they knew who you were and they asked you, should they join advertising, what would you tell them?
I think first question you have to do is why?
Right.
Why do you want to be in advertising? What is advertising to you? Because if I was coming now as a youngster, I would be wanting to do something pretty good in society, not something that was hurting society. So I'd be questioning because they've been born into a different generation where basically my generation, a lot of generation, has really messed up the world for them. And now I think they also have the ability, because of technology, to be much more fluid. They want to do lots of things. They don't want to be in one job all their career. And actually, so Tony Cunningham, who runs the Watford, very successful course, he is getting far less applicants now for his course. Because people just go, why would I want to be in advertised working for the man?
Right.
Why would I want to be doing that? I want to be running my own thing or doing my own thing.
From your perspective, what is the future for an Omnicom or a WPP? Where do you think they're headed?
I think because they're financially...
You started smiling and then you stopped.
Well, because I don't think they'll go... I mean, you got to remember, WPP has its fingers in huge amounts of things. It's not just, it's like it bought Vice, it bought, it's like huge. It's a bit like some of the holding...
I'm talking about the advertising business part of WPP.
Well, I think he will tell you massively he's seen it transition from like traditional media into completely different, digital comms, and that will continue to go on. My debate is about how creative are the opportunities being caused, because they should be, So I don't really care what they go on. I don't think what WPP will do is build a really, really, really interesting creative culture,
right,
which spawns really interesting things.
Right.
That's what I think they will continue. They're an acquisitions company.
Right.
They will continue to acquire companies that are maybe doing that. Yeah, and they go, we'll buy them. And I'm telling these companies to stay independent, because I think it was a lot better when everybody was independent and we were all sort of fighting and grappling.
Right, sure.
Don't sell out.
Even John Hegarty sold out.
Yeah,
he did.
Sorry, John, you did sell out. You did really well there. Yeah, and I, John might deny this, and sorry, John, but it has changed. BBH is not BBH any longer. It is Publicis with a sort of slash BBH, and it is just being run by different people. John, Nigel, who's still there, but John, Nigel, and John, they set up something extraordinary, and they achieved amazing success. And I think it was largely through independence that they did that.
You brought up this word in your last answer. You used the word culture. Now tell me about culture at Wieden and how the culture travels across, for example, to an office in India.
I think part of the success of the culture of Wieden's is that Dan gives each office an amazing amount of freedom to be what it wants to be. There's very few rules. I mean, they found the rules in the drawer, famously, of the office they were moving into, and it sort of said, be good, shut up when someone's talking.
Go to church on Sunday.
It was like, it was literally. Yeah. But I think there's very few rules other than, I think the best people, if you know Dan, you sort of get a feeling.
Right.
He's like this capitalist hippie kind of thing, and you get there's a feeling about him that, you know, the reason he started it was, you know, he didn't start it for this reason, but it developed into a reason where he was giving people the chance who couldn't get near creativity to be creative.
Fantastic. Best of luck in that. And thank you for talking to us. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
It's time for us to take a short break. When we return, we speak to Raj Kamble, founder and CCO, Famous Innovations, about what made him quit his flourishing job in the US and start his own independent advertising agency. We'll be right back.